Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. Today's panel is titled Making Government Better with Better Technology. We really appreciate you coming and joining us today. I know it's a little hot out there, so this hopefully will cool us off a little bit. We're very excited with today's panel. I think we're going to have a great conversation. And just a little bit about myself. My name is Cindy Jimenez. I work with United Technologies. I am in the Government Relations Office. UTC, United Technologies, is a company that manufactures engines for fighter planes, commercial planes. We also have Otis elevators. We have Carrier heating and cooling. And we also have fire and security products, such as if you see fire alarms or smoke alarms at Home Depot, we typically make those. And we also launch astronauts to space station. We are the sole provider to NASA on getting astronauts to the moon since the Apollo days. So we are a company that relies on technology. We're always looking at ways to make it better, to partner with the government to make products that are innovative, creative, and that will take us to the next generation in aviation and space, as well as getting people better technology in their homes with elevators and heating and cooling systems. So today with us we have three great panelists. We have Senator Jim Moran from Kansas. We have Congressman Jimmy Gomez from California, and we have Julie, and I'm gonna Stitzel from the U.S. Chamber. So I'm gonna start off with Senator Moran, and I was reading your bio, and oh my God, you've been in public service since 19...
Don't say it that way.
Oh my God. No, I find it impressive because a lot of people don't understand how difficult it is to be a public servant. People think it's just fun and games, but no, it's a lot of work. You dedicate pretty much your entire day to looking at ways to see how government can make people's lives better, and we really appreciate it. And I know that you've had a long, amazing career. You represent the 1st Congressional District. You were a member of Congress of the 1st Congressional District in Kansas. Then you got elected to the Senate in 19... No, that was 97 when you were a state senator in 2010. Yes. And you are a member of the, you're currently the chair of the National Republican Senate Committee. You're also an appropriator who handles a lot of work dealing with agriculture, defense, labor, HHS, and education. And this is one of the reasons that I think we really want to hear from you, because you are working on legislation that directly impacts the topic today. One of them is the Startup Act, I believe, and that one works with it. It's about H-1B visas and looking at entrepreneurship. So we really want to hear about that today. So with that, Senator, I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I apologize to particularly the folks in the early rows and certainly the folks on the panel. I need a shower. And that may be the next event of the afternoon. Delighted to be back at South by. This is my sixth visit out of 7 years that I've been a United States Senator. And this has given me an opportunity to come and promote places across Kansas as potential startups and an environment in which we want to make certain that is an environment in Kansas that we want to make sure is utilized, and to talk about a topic that I've been working on with a number of my colleagues for a number of years now. Just a couple of things that I want to highlight legislatively and then turn to other panelists and we can take your questions. I'm on a mission to see that we improve the environment in which someone who wants to start a business has a better chance at success. And we're now in our 5th edition of a piece of legislation called the Startup Act. And in 2011, we introduced this legislation. Basically, that came about as a result of a report that landed on my desk from the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City, the Kauffman Foundation for Entrepreneurship. And they had recommendations of what, first of all, they outlined the problems in our economy and in our country in which startups were not being pursued. The entrepreneurial environment was diminishing, and the chances of someone's success who wanted to start a business was not increasing. That's a very damaging thing for our nation, and it's not static. When we're slipping or when we're not progressing, other countries are doing more and better, and we lose the opportunity for what I call to pursue the American dream. And so they had some policy recommendations that we drafted into legislative form. We went out and sought Democrat support for a Republican-introduced bill. Senator Warner from Virginia, a Democrat from Virginia, and I became colleagues on this. We've been locked at the hip now for a number of years trying to make certain that we change the policy. And we can talk about the legislative criteria in this legislation, but really what we're about is trying to reduce the barriers that people face who want to start a business. And that is things related to regulation, to tax, to access to capital. Perhaps one of the most important mentioned by the moderator is the global access to talent. We need to make certain that we have an immigration system in which we can increase the number of people who have STEM education, who have entrepreneurial opportunities to come to the United States. So this legislation increases entrepreneurial visas by 100,000 and creates additional 75,000 slots for those who are pursuing STEM education. It increases the opportunity for federally funded research to be more quickly provided into the private hands, for the opportunity for advancing commercialization of research that we have, taxpayers have funded. We're working on the provision that now has been added to increase the opportunity for the economic development in the Department of Commerce to be modernized and improved and get dollars to organizations across the country who promote entrepreneurship and innovation to bring this opportunity to every American. I would say that if you ask somebody, and I would guess that the congressman from California, we're in front of students from time to time. You ask a high school student or even a college student, what do you want to do when you grow up? Almost no one says, I want to start my own business or I want to work for myself. And we need to change the attitude and environment in which that's a much more normal response to that question. And so we want to demonstrate that entrepreneurs can succeed, and we want to get the handicaps, the barriers out of the way. We worked on a number of other pieces of legislation that affect entrepreneurship. I just would mention one other. We are attempting to alter the way in which the federal government procures IT, move us more quickly to the cloud, and to provide greater opportunities for cybersecurity in federal IT. This legislation is being implemented now. It passed the United States Senate, the House, and been signed into law by the President. And I'd be happy to have a conversation about these and other issues. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to join my colleagues on the panel and to have a conversation with each of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Also with us today, we have Congressman Jimmy Gomez, who represents the 34th Congressional District of California. And for many of you who are not familiar with this district, this is a district that was formerly represented by now Attorney General Javier Becerra, who is very well-known, well-liked, big shoes to fill, but from what I've seen so far, I think you are on your way to be just as impactful and as extraordinary as he has been. Side note here, I've known Congressman Jimmy Gomez since back in the day when we were both Hill staffers, but now I have to call him Congressman, so it's a very different experience. We're very proud of you. So Congressman, just a little bit, we want to hear about the GREAT Act, which is an initiative that you are launching that focuses on creating, using technology to increase transparency within the U.S. government. We would like to hear a little bit about that. And then also, more about your committees as well in oversight, natural resources, and your role with the Progressive Caucus. So.
Thank you so much. First, my name is Jimmy Gomez, and I represent 34th Congressional District, which is downtown Los Angeles, through Hancock Park, Koreatown, through Northeast LA, East LA. It's a very, very diverse district. We have the most Koreans in any other congressional district in the country, large Latino population, LGBT population, also folks that work in the creative arts, tech, green technology, you name it, we kind of represent that area. But I want to talk about a couple of things, just kind of thinking about this panel. One is, how do you use technology to improve the function of government? And two, how do you use government to create opportunities for tech startups to emerge? Two different concepts. One, trying to use technology to improve government, it depends on the level of government. What I've noticed is that each one has its own complexities, its own issues. I'm actually working on a piece of legislation that's been introduced numerous times, and I think the senator would agree that if this was easy, these bills wouldn't take multiple years to pass. The GREAT Act, it's a very, this name sounds amazing, but it just deals with how do you modernize grant reporting so that people using technology so that anybody can use the portal that we create to apply for grants when it comes to research and development, when it comes to new innovations. But it's a very simple idea, and it's basically creating a standardized way of reporting that information, making it searchable, and then making it that it's accessible. But there's millions and millions of grant applications a year, so it's one of the issues. But it's difficult because there's already kind of companies that are in a space of making the government work now, right? So if anything's in place like that has been working for decades or not working for decades, it's hard to kind of change that direction. So this is a bill that I'm working with Representative Virginia Fox from North Carolina, a very conservative Republican, and I represent a very progressive district in Los Angeles. 8% Republican voter registration. Don't throw a rock in my district because you'll hit a Democrat. But it is different, but we care about one thing. How do you make government work better, right? And I think that's something that both sides of the aisle can agree upon. When it comes to how do you like government and technology, first, I'm going to kind of tell you about my experience at the state level. I was a state rep for 4.5 years. I served on a number of committees. We have to make sure that we don't overregulate startups and innovation. There was a bill that a colleague introduced, and what it was like her daughter or granddaughter put her public information on Facebook or something like that, and she wanted to pass a law that would allow any parent to go on and take that information off, and then it was interesting, or even get permission to even sign up for Facebook. So it was really kind of heavy-handed. And a lot of the people on the committee I was serving on were youngish. I'm 43. I was 38 when I got elected. In Congress, it's very young, but in the state house and maybe in the real world, it's not that young. But we understood that that's just too heavy of a regulation for what? And we have to also keep in mind, anytime we pass a law or a bill, the technology is evolving so quickly that your bill is going to be obsolete by the time it gets implemented anyways. So why do it? So that's kind of one of the things that I looked at. Additionally, how do you make agencies at the state level, local level, federal level less risk averse, right? A lot of agencies they're afraid to take risk on new projects or new technologies. Maybe it's outside their scope. It's not allowed under the regulations. A colleague of mine, Susan Bonilla, who was in the assembly, she passed a piece of legislation that allowed the DMV, because we didn't have anybody, to work with Google to start creating a pilot program to test the autonomous vehicles. Without that piece of legislation, they never would have been able to get off the ground to start testing, right? So government can be used to spur innovation, but also if it's not done correctly, it can stop innovation. So we always have to kind of be very aware of that. So those are kind of some of the interests I have, but also how do you get the people from all communities to benefit, right? Not just from the people that go to the best schools, but everyone. I represent a district, Hancock Park, multi-millionaires, probably a few billionaires, and then a part of the district that's also $19,000 per capita income a year, right? How do you close that digital divide, the green divide that exists in these communities, and allow everybody to partake in this booming industry that's going to most likely change just kind of our culture, our economy, and make sure that no one's left behind and you don't create greater disparity between people that have resources and the people that do not. So those are kind of some of the direction I'm going in. And I'm brand new in Congress, so I literally speak at the end of every panel, so I'm actually glad I'm on this panel. I don't have to speak last. But I appreciate that all of you are here, and some of it is, I participated in an earlier panel, and I learned more from the audience than I think they learned from me. So I look forward to hearing your questions and your comments. Thank you so much.
Next, we have Julie Stitzel. Julie is the Managing Director for Policy and Strategic Initiatives for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We're so glad to have you here with us today. And so we just want to get some sort of your take and insight on and interesting points on how the Chamber gets entrepreneurs to start thinking about businesses and certain regulations.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to be here. So my name is Julie Stitzel. I'm the Managing Director for the Chamber Technology Engagement Center, which is the tech policy hub of the U.S. Chamber. For those who aren't familiar with the U.S. Chamber, we represent about 3 million businesses throughout the U.S. We have 1,600 state and local chapters, so we have a presence at the local and state as well as the federal and international as well. And our program, CTech, was stood up about 3 years ago under the recognition that technology and business are pretty much one and the same nowadays. And it's fantastic to hear the great comments and efforts by the senator as well as the congressman. We wholeheartedly support that because at the end of the day, our goal is to advance business. And in the emerging tech field, we try to strike that right balance between regulation, if it's needed, that does not stifle the innovation, but also respects maybe some of the concerns that people have along the way, whether it's on safety and privacy. And so our portfolio is focused on 5 areas for now. We work on autonomous vehicles. We work on UAS, otherwise known as drones. We have a working group dedicated to the new economy, so the gig economy, all of the startups in the sharing economy, and something we're calling high tech, high impact, and as well a telecommunications working group. And at the end of the day, we are trying to marry the larger companies that are more established within the chamber with the smaller startups, but also tell the story around how tech is changing the nature of work, but in a positive way. So I look forward to questions as well, and really appreciate the efforts of the senator and the congressman for advocating, being fierce advocates for new entrepreneurs in the system.
Thank you, thank you. So let's, the U.S., America is the land of opportunity. It is a place where we encourage innovation. This is one of the pillars of our country and why it's made us so successful, and we are leaders in many areas today. Hearing all of you speak, you've talked a lot about the challenges and some of the things that Congress can do, but if Congress is going to look at ways to either get out of the way or make innovation and entrepreneurs, lives easier, what would you need to hear from the entrepreneurial community to help you navigate or craft opportunities that would be helpful?
This might be an opportunity just to indicate that entrepreneurs have a lot at stake in the public policy debates that have occurred and will occur in our nation's capital. And what I would suggest is that the question is, what do we need to hear? I would use this as an opportunity to indicate to those who have an interest in the entrepreneurial opportunities of our nation to actually connect with elected officials. Get acquainted with a congressman, get acquainted with a senator, and I would make the point that I think it's easy to do. Invite a member of Congress to come see your business or to sit down and have a conversation with you about what the challenges are for you in trying to develop an idea and take it to market and to earn a living. I don't know a single entrepreneur that if they connect, or a single member of Congress that if you connect with them, they're not going to be interested in what you have to say and have a significant opportunity to learn. I would guess, again, most members of Congress are not entrepreneurs, but getting acquainted with somebody who is doing something that creates jobs within their district or their state is very appealing. And so it is very useful for individuals who are here at South by, but back home, somebody who's going to create a job in your city, your congressional district, your state, that's somebody that a member of Congress wants to know. We encourage, Senator Warner and I ask all of the members of Congress, 435 House members, 100 senators, to pledge that they would have an event in which they met with entrepreneurs in their districts and their states. Many accepted that pledge and did that. And then to take from that conversation, what are the barriers that keep good things from happening, and then to work with us and others to eliminate those barriers. So I would use your question as an opportunity to encourage people who are here and people who are listening to connect with us and make the case for what matters to you, what could be done that would increase the chances that you will be successful, better earn a living, and in the process of your success, put more Americans to work.
What I would do, first, I always take an opportunity to, in my district, when I was in the state assembly and now in Congress, to really visit entrepreneurs, small business owners, people, even large corporations. We have a green tech accelerator in my incubator accelerator in my district, Coretz. I'm not sure if people are familiar with that in downtown Los Angeles. Really going to talk to them about what are their issues. And some of it's from small things to large things. I have a constituent who talked about not having access to a T1 line in the community that we live in because it's a community that is transitioning, it's changing, and he has, five staffers that do software programming, right? And sounds simple, access to a T1 line, but certain communities and certain areas don't have that. So going from the smallest thing as a member of Congress to the largest things, right? Big picture to the local. That's what I want to hear, and everything in between, because you never know where that new idea is going to spark, kind of a new piece of legislation, or even making a phone call to an agency to ask questions. Oftentimes, legislation takes a while to pass in Congress, but the questions often prompt agencies to start moving forward on a regulation or a piece of legislation that was passed in previous years. So I always like to ask, from the smallest thing, what is impacting you? Is it, education, financing, infrastructure? What is it? And sometimes those comments from just different folks spark a new idea and progress on an issue. That's what I would like to ask for folks about.
Thank you, Congressman. Julie?
So kind of flipping the lens, I think that when you, particularly with tech, there's often this divide between an understanding of what's happening from the innovation side and maybe catching up from the legislative side. And so I think for the chamber, something that we can do or that we do is increase exposure to what's happening on the innovative side, so there's not this huge chasm between an understanding of how things are developing and where things need to go, mostly to be somewhat defensive, so it's not over-regulated. But I also think that you're in a unique position too, because you can see the full picture of your state or of your district, and you have an opportunity to also be a convener and to connect VCs maybe who are interested in investing in your state or your district with those entrepreneurs or those people who might not know how to navigate that system, but you have this fabulous platform to be an advocate for your state or your district. And finally, I would say that a lot of the folks that we work with have this they're crossing the country between wherever they're located and DC, and so you have a team of people with a lot of the companies that we work with who are very highly successful at maneuvering DC and identifying opportunities for the private sector as well.
Great idea. The one about convening folks who are playing in that area of entrepreneurs or startups and gathering them and having, I don't know if this is already taking place, but it sounds like a great idea for policymakers to sort of, spearhead. want to shift to workforce development. I know that you have the Startup Act focusing on H-1B visas, and Congressman Gomez, I know that you are very familiar with immigration issues because of the Hispanic caucus in Congress, and of course the Chamber very much involved. I'd like to, maybe we can hear from you as to how we can, it's clearly the U.S. is losing on a lot of talent that is coming to the U.S. to study, and then they go somewhere else to work. And not only that, they're creating new initiatives, they're creating businesses that are resulting in jobs, growing their economy somewhere else, not here in the U.S. Unfortunately, this is getting sort of looped into the whole immigration debate. So I want to hear from you, from each of you on that, and then the workforce development and STEM, what ideas or the policy initiatives that you're working on in Congress and also within the Chamber.
Well, I can start it off. So the Chamber is supportive of finding a resolution with respect to the Dreamers, and that's reflective of, I think, the intention of all of our member companies as well. As far as workforce development goes, it's a huge issue, and it's not just CTEC that's working on this. We are partnering closely with our education and workforce team as well as our foundation, because there's a recognition that we need to better arm American workers with the skills and develop that are needed to compete in this global economy. But that's one piece of a larger puzzle, because then you get into, okay, once they are able to compete, for the entrepreneurs who are in that space or have that skill set, how do we make it easier for them if they want to become their own bosses, if they want to do their own thing? How can we create an environment that is incentivizing that entrepreneurship? So working with our education and workforce team, working with our foundation, and getting out of DC and into the states and localities and better understanding where people are, and doing a better job of matching the skills that companies need with the skills that the workers need as well.
Thank you so much. No, good question. When it comes to workforce, of course, HB1 visas are extremely important, but I believe in comprehensive immigration reform across the board, right? And this is for just our economy to keep moving. When it comes to DACA recipients, it was interesting. I was meeting with Accenture the other day, and they mentioned that they were interested in taking care of the DACA recipients and making sure that we found a solution. And I asked them, is there anything else? And they're all, no, that's the most important thing, because we actually have folks who are DACA recipients. These are the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, who are working within their companies, working on artificial intelligence and working on with some of their contracts, and they actually are currently here. So I think that it's across the board, comprehensive immigration reform, and this means dealing with enforcement issues, pathways to citizenship. This means across the board. But definitely, we are not meeting the demand for the workforce that we need in high tech and in low tech. I have farmers that are visiting me from California that are often talking about the shortages of workers. That's a big deal. At the same time, farming is not what it used to be, right? Farming now uses technology throughout. They have little microchips that go in the ground to measure the water that's and the moisture that for their crops, so they know where to water, when to water, because water is a precious resource in the West. So it really does go across the front. When it comes to developing the skills necessary, it's absolutely correct. We need to figure out, really work as a private, public, and nonprofit partnership to get individuals the skills they need to fulfill these jobs. And when I was in the legislature, I was really interested, and I still am, on how do I do that? And it is more difficult than I ever imagined. I would visit the accelerators and the incubators. I even went out to a group out in Santa Monica called General Assembly that's working on kind of teaching people coding and so. And it was there's so many barriers. Financing. It's a $10,000 to take a 6-week course, and oftentimes those individuals end up in good-paying jobs. But if some people don't have access to that $10,000. So there's financing for their education. So it's a question that I'm struggling with, and I would love to hear some ideas. In California, there's one example that they're thinking outside the box. The LA Metropolitan Transportation Authority is going to build out their mass transit system. And mass transit is not just brick and mortar. It is high tech. It's electrification. It deals with a lot of different aspects of a transportation system. But what they're saying is that they're having difficulty finding people to fill their hard to fill positions, right? The ones that have skills. So what they're doing is they're working with the LA Board of Education to build a high school so that they can actually train their workforce that it's going to be coming online, because they have it mapped out that they're going to be building these lines by this year. We need these kind of individuals by this time and these kind of individuals by this time. It's kind of brilliant, and I haven't figured out why we haven't been able to do that with other industries like biotech, when it comes to communications and environmental sector as well. I would love to see some more innovation, for lack of a better word, in education and training of these individuals.
The most common conversation I have with a business owner is, I'm hiring, I want to employ more people, I can't find the people who want to work, and I can't find people who have the skill set to work in this business. Certainly, immigration is a component of this, and as I indicated in our Startup Act, we increased the number of visas available for entrepreneurs to come to the United States, but also for STEM-educated students to stay in the United States. But we also need to focus on our own country's educational system, in which we dramatically increase the number of students who are pursuing interests in science, mathematics, engineering, and research. If we want to remain a globally competitive nation, we need a workforce that meets today's requirements. And so most education decisions are made in state and local venues. There are a number of federal programs related to education. One of them would be Perkins grants, in which we fund in community colleges and high schools across the country technical and vocational education. I think sometimes, again, workforces certainly requires the high-tech skills, but I think in too many instances we fail to indicate to our kids that it is a desirable career, a desirable education for vocational and technical education. It doesn't require the PhD. We need people who have other skill sets and other academic interests, and they are successful people. I know in the circumstances of my state, you are more likely to be perceived as a success if you're gone off to a university. If you graduate from a university, you're perceived more successful if you leave and go to a city. We need to change that mindset because we have businesses across the country. One of the great things about startups and entrepreneurs is that in many instances it doesn't matter where you live. And if you care about rural communities across the nation, the opportunity for young men and women, for people to pursue a business of their own is readily available in their hometowns where they grew up, in rural places across the country. In regard to the immigration issue, I remember one time being in Silicon Valley and visiting Facebook or Google, and the conversation was, Senator, we applied for, I think the number was 27 H-1B visas. Senator, we were denied those. We didn't make the lottery, but we hired those individuals anyway, and that of course got my attention. The sentence that then follows is, but we hired them in our facility in Canada. And we certainly, what that means is at a minimum, we lost 27 people who would be employed in the United States, but more likely we lost the next person who's going to invent, who's going to create the next Google or Facebook or other new business. They're now employed in Canada, not in the United States. And if we want to continue to have a vibrant, growing economy, we need the skill sets that those individuals provide, not just for the work they do, but for those who then use that intellect, those capabilities to create another business and employ more people. It's the way the American dream works. Someone pursuing their own American dream has the opportunity to create opportunities for others in our nation to pursue their American dream. So this issue of workforce training is significant. We have the need for more workers, not less. We have the need for more technically and vocationally educated workers. And we need to be encouraging people to pursue careers and to recognize that work is a noble thing and that they have an opportunity to have success in those careers. Again, immigration matters, but we also need to have a much greater focus on educating those who are here already to fulfill the needs. I often attend robotics competitions, generally involving middle school kids, often girls. The idea of making certain that everyone believes that engineering and science is something they can pursue, and certainly the evidence is that decisions made early in a person's life have a significant consequence about their ability to do the things later in life. So younger and more diverse interest in science and engineering would be a great development.
And just to piggyback off of that, I think a critical piece of that is making sure that every American has access to the internet. We've got about 30 Americans right now who don't, and that's so essential whether you are at that education level, whether you're looking for a job, or whether you are starting or scaling your business to compete in a global economy. And so we also need to, I think, prioritize getting everybody online.
Yeah, and I wanted to add a couple of things. We definitely want to get people the skills, but one of the things I noticed working at the state level, sometimes government can't keep up with developing curriculum that matches the needs of the workforce that people currently need, right? And we saw this because I would visit these different folks that were training folks to get the skills to go into these jobs, and they were just saying that they had to constantly were evolving their curriculum. It was always changing. Government, when it comes to curriculum, it has to first start off with at this commission in California, and then it has to have numerous public hearings, and it has to go, and it makes sense because these are public dollars, but it's too slow. It's too slow. So we have to figure that component out. When it comes to making sure folks have access to the internet, that's crucial. One of the things I was in Alabama for the first time last weekend, and it didn't feel that I was in a very rural area of Alabama. I mean, I guess Alabama is mostly rural anyways. And my cell phone did not work for a good portion of that trip. And I've never seen that in California except in the deep redwoods where you just had this thick canopy where you couldn't get the signal. The digital divide is real, and I don't think we understand that, especially coming from the urban areas and in more populous states. So that's something we definitely need to work across the entire country, not just in big cities.
We have a number of programs involved that involve the federal government in broadband deployment and access to the internet, generally revolving around the FCC and Universal Service Fund, but also at the Department of Agriculture, something called the Rural Utilities Service, designed to subsidize, to support the deployment of broadband in places that otherwise would not receive it. The population is so lacking that in the private sector it would be very difficult for there ever to be a profit in providing that service. We also have pending, I guess pending is probably too strong of a word, but this Congress should debate an infrastructure bill, what generally is called a transportation bill. But we need to make certain that infrastructure is something broader than roads, bridges, and highways. Although they're significantly important, it needs to also include access to technology, broadband deployment, access to the internet. And it's one of the good, I'm the rural guy here perhaps, and I would say it's one of the things that we can do to help rural America survive and have a future. Things that used to have to be done, careers that had to be pursued in cities can now be pursued in rural communities, hometowns, middle America or middle part of a state because of the access of technology. And as the congressman indicated, agriculture, even in rural America, is changing in a way that requires the internet in order to operate your tractor or your combine to do the kinds of sensory opportunities that agriculture now presents in application of fertilizer and irrigation. Just that technology now, even in rural America, in agriculture, is required not just to connect with the rest of the world, but to operate your equipment in the business that you're in.
Thank you. That was a great response, a lot to think about. So now we are at the last part of this panel where we open up the panel for questions from the audience. We have we have one microphone here right in the middle. If anyone is interested in asking a question, please come up and hopefully we can get to all of them before we finish. And please give us your name.
Is it on now? Okay. Hi, guys. My name is Amy Wilson, and I don't know if you've heard of this program. I serve as a Presidential Innovation Fellow. Have you heard of that program in the government? We're entrepreneurs in residence for the federal government, and started in Obama era in 2012, and we are brought in to disrupt things. So we partner with agencies, and I've been serving for a little over 2 years. And I've been studying how does culture change and transformation happen internal to the government. And 2 months ago, we launched innovation.gov, which I coded myself, which I'm proud of. And I've been doing a lot of work with people in government, and what has come out of it in the past year is this idea of the better government movement. And one of the key things that we're pushing forward in our work is this idea of there's enterprise-wide level policies that are stopping people in the government from working with startups, from people working and thinking in new and 21st century ways of thinking. So we are really a grassroots movement that we've been building. We have about 3,000 or 4,000 people who are in our orbit. So my question for you guys is, we're seeing there's a big disconnect with the people like me who's a PIF, and then other people who are doing innovation in government. There's a big disconnect with people on the front lines like us, and then people in the legislation, in Congress. So I wanted to see what your thoughts are on how might we work better together so that we can make sure that we make the best country we can make, and the best government we can make. So I'd love to talk to you more about this too, but I'd love to get your thoughts.
First, love to get your information, number one. One of the Congress, I've only been there 8 months, getting information is a lot more difficult. You have to kind of go out and search for it. Oftentimes, we don't know that. I think I heard about the Presidential Innovation Fellow before. I'm not sure if it's still ongoing. But it's something that I would love to kind of pick your brain about some of your findings, what can be done. And there are, you're right, there are institutional barriers, right? Cultural barriers. There's, even within just the legislative body. I was telling the senator last week, for the first time, they put up the voting on, digital voting on screen so you can actually see it. This was in the Natural Resources Committee, and they're like, we're going to experiment with that. Didn't seem like a very hard thing to do on how to improve the function of the legislative process. But I would love to really pick your brain. Just come on in. And I'm still learning where to go for some of those, some of that insight. So thank you.
You're doing your job today, Amy Wilson. Thank you very much for telling us the story. I'm happy to hear about it and would welcome you and your fellow interns, others who are involved in this, to get us the information. We're very interested in fact, a piece of legislation, every once in a while a bill actually becomes law, and we introduced a bill called Modernizing Government Technology, MGT. It has been signed into law, and what we know is that we're wasting many taxpayer dollars in legacy equipment that needs to be replaced, technology that is outdated, and we've created the funding mechanism by which there's incentive for a department or an agency. In fact, 24 federal agencies now are participating, and they get to keep the savings that they achieve by acquiring better technology, saving them money. They take that money and then can procure. Ultimately, the goal here is to get better technology, latest technology, probably move us to the cloud and provide greater cybersecurity for the information that we collect in the federal government. It sounds to me like you're very knowledgeable and involved and have hands-on experience. We welcome that. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Max Gersman, and I am pursuing a master's in business analytics at Syracuse University. I'd also like to note that out of about 15 people getting that degree at Syracuse, I'm the only one that's an American citizen. And it seems to me that a big problem among my peers in getting a continuing education, getting STEM education, and then maybe being an entrepreneur later is the cost of college and taking on student debt after college and then having to pay that off as a young professional. What action do you think that the United States government should take to make sure that students can get access to this really important education and improve American businesses?
No, first, thank you so much. Somebody who's still paying off their student loans, I feel your pain when you graduate. We definitely need to figure the student debt crisis out, right? We have a situation in this country that people are taking on lots of debt to get their education, and they're not being able to pay it back. And we actually are having a student debt bubble starting to kind of emerge. We're going to have to look at that, figure that out, because that is going to be a big deal. At the state level and at the federal level, I would love to see how do we make certain types of education or colleges free. In California, we just passed for the first time first year of community college free to get their basics and their education. The second year, we're working on that. But it has to be a greater investment in education to reduce the cost of that student loan debt. And the reason why we did it is we want people to go and get some of their basic classes out of the way before they go off to a university. There's no easy answer. There's some people that will say, hey, free community college, or free college in general, I'd love to do that. But then they don't have a way to pay for it. But I do believe that we have to have a greater investment in college. The student debt burden for folks is way, way, way too high. When I went off to my grad school, I went to the Kennedy School of Government. It was about $44,000 a year. Now, I don't know. It's like double, I think. And I don't have my degree is not. It's a generalist degree, right? I think maybe we could focus on how do you kind of give incentives for people to go into STEM, to get that kind of degree. We have to kind of really look at it, but you're right. Student debt is a real big problem in this country.
Thank you, Congressman. We have about 10 minutes left, so let's see if we can, I know we have several folks up there. Let's see if we can get to all of you. Please.
Hi, yeah, it's sort of, I think, related to his question. Congressman, you mentioned General Assembly. I'm actually a recent graduate of Hack Reactor, which is a similar program here in Austin. And I was curious what you guys' opinions are on whether government is going to reach a point, do you think, that you're willing to, I guess, encourage or maybe even integrate some of these more non-traditional post-secondary education options? Because I think it solves a lot of the student debt issues in terms of shorter programs, lower tuitions, and really, I think in 12 weeks, I learned more relevant job skills than I learned in a year of gen ed classes at college. So I'm kind of curious what you see the future of that being, and whether you think that there's any hope of even integrating that kind of a program.
I didn't understand exactly everything you said, or nor do I know. what the program you said, but I would highlight just generally part of the. I'm a supporter of Pell Grants, for example, and support we've increased the amount of money available. We've made them year-long, summer school included. But what I do observe is that every time we make more money available for student loans, the cost of education goes up. So it increases the cost because the money is then more readily available to students, and we reduce the incentive for universities to find ways to provide education in a more cost-effective, less expensive way. And if I understood what you said, I would agree with you. One of the opportunities, and the Congressman mentioned this, is the opportunity to pursue community college or community college or other education while you're in high school. Get those basic credits out of the way. I've often wondered why, and again, states would be different one from another, but you have a 2.5-month summer recess, a month at Christmas. These are, if we would shorten the school year, reduce the period of time from 4 years to get a bachelor's degree to 3, we're saving money on certainly cost of living, books, living expenses. I just think there's a different way that we ought to be looking at what we generally provide in an education. We're seeing the change today in which education is going online. Again, it changes. I don't know that I want students to miss out on the opportunity of, quote, college life, but there ought to be incentives for universities to make decisions about how to shorten the period of time and have less expense associated with going to a university or to college. I also think that in the fields that the gentleman before you is exploring, employers ought to be interested in helping you afford that education with the understanding that you're coming to work for them. You're creating a talent and an intellect that is desperately needed, and your potential employer, your future employers, can be a participant in the cost of that education.
No, and I'm definitely interested in figuring out how to support those kind of non-traditional schools that for training purposes, right? Technical education, I think, is huge. We want to give kids an opportunity to decide what they want to do with their life, right? But at the same time, we do need to create these incentives for people to go into these professions that are jobs are really, are available today. I was a biochem major. I attended a community college. I thought I was going to be a doctor. Went to a workshop on political activism, changed my major, and it changed my life, right? So we want to create flexibility for people to fulfill where they have actual talents. If I try to do programming, probably not be very good at it. But I would love to see more of that when it comes to community college. I'm a big fan of community colleges because that's where I started. That's where I kind of turned my life around. And how do we use those programs like the one you went through, General Assembly? I am interested in it. I haven't figured it out yet. And still developing the ideas. But yeah, we got to look at all options. But the senator is correct. Sometimes when you do provide more resources, the cost of that same education goes up. So we need to figure that out. But thank you for the question.
Thank you both.
I have a question specifically on better technology for better government. Most of my career, I've been a government contractor, and I love developing apps or web applications for government, doing public service. The thing that discourages me from doing something like starting my own company is there's so many disparate contract vehicles. I'm just interested in what you think the utility of contract vehicles is, and how a lot of startups fail because they're unable to, some of them are totally inaccessible. Like, for example, I used to work for City of Baltimore, and their contracting vehicle, it was nearly impossible to get on it, and you had to know somebody who was already on it in order to work for City of Baltimore. So I'm just interested in what you think the utility of disparate contract vehicles is for government?
Great question. I'm actually trying to figure that out as we speak. So I started working on this grant transparency to make grants more accessible. And it was introduced we got it introduced, and we went to the oversight committee, and some members of the oversight want to attach contracting to it, to make contracting their portals. How do you kind of figure out what's out there? How do you kind of access it? I was like, how are we going to get that into that bill without making that bill die before it ever gets out of that committee? So we ended up dividing the piece of legislation. Virginia Fox is the lead co-sponsor of the GREAT Act, and now I'm focusing on a similar bill dealing with government contracts. So I'm working on it. Love to get your experience at the local level, but it's something that we do need to figure out, because if people can't figure out how to navigate that federal government to get the contracts for certain types for their business, right, to be competitive, they're just shut out. So yeah, I'd love to kind of talk to you about that, but it's something that just started working on just maybe a couple of weeks ago.
Hi there. Thank you very much for your time tonight. So I'm a former small business owner in Baltimore, Maryland, actually. I owned a deli and a coffee shop there for about 4 years after finishing my undergrad program. And one of the most regular issues that I remember running into actually was just dealing with government websites, in particular state and local websites. I mean, they're kind of dinosaurs of the industry at this point, to be totally honest. I was always kind of fascinated with this question of why is it so, simple to, for instance, create a South by Southwest app or something that will deliver shoes to you from around the world on demand. But the most important information that we could possibly need as citizens is sometimes so difficult to access. So what steps, if any, are being taken, and how can that progress in order to kind of catch up internal websites within the government to a place of modernity?
The incentives of government are different than the private sector, in which trying to earn a living causes you to do things differently than simply the instruction that you're supposed to provide information to the public. So we have passed legislation that requires CIOs, the information officers within cabinet and government agencies, to upgrade their plans for this topic of providing information. That's new legislation. Here's my suggestion to me and to other members, particularly of the Appropriations Committee, but members of Congress. Every time a government official, somebody who heads an agency, is in front of us asking for money, making the case for their comments on legislation, we need to bring up this topic of how do you do your job on the information side at your agency? Are you user-friendly? Again, you've experienced the challenges. I do the same thing that the congressman said. Tell us what you think the suggestions would be. But I think this is just an issue that gets overlooked way too many times by members of Congress, by Congress generally, and agencies have little incentive to make changes. It's not where they get rewarded.
That's a good point. It's hard to take a photo op in front of a website, I guess. So a lot of elected officials don't put enough emphasis on how do you modernize technology, right? And it's crucial. And oftentimes, even in Los Angeles, they pass law, they implement a new app that is supposed to, that you can use to order a trash pickup for a couch that was left on the street. And that doesn't quite work, right? Or it does work sometimes. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. We need to really kind of figure that component out. At local level is a lot better. State level is a little bit better. Federal government's a little worse. I'm a big supporter of the Affordable Care Act, but they had to call in, the private sector to come and help with healthcare.gov, right? That's kind of stuff can't happen. So we definitely need to make sure that we have that solid partnerships with the private sector and the people that have the skills that can do the job, right? And sometimes you don't have it in-house. You got to go outside that your agency or your level of government.
One thing I would add too, as a small business owner, I would imagine that one of your most precious commodities was time. And so being able to easily navigate the website, but another cost of that is the government provides a lot of services to small businesses, just people are not aware that they exist. And so I think another plus of modernizing that piece of it and is not just increasing the efficiency, but also a better understanding of the resources that are available to you so that you can utilize them.
We're going to have to answer this offline because we have another panel coming up, and I do apologize. Just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Senator Moran. Thank you, Congressman Gomez. Thank you, Chamber of Commerce. And this will continue, I'm sure, because it seems to be a very interesting topic. Thank you again.